We're celebrating the 6th season of the podcast with a massive giveaway from our generous friends of the podcast. To enter, all you have to do is leave a review of Water People wherever you listen, on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. By leaving a review before July 15th, you'll be entered to win $1,000 toward a custom Gary McNeil surfboard of your choice, 4 $250 vouchers for stoneandwood.com, a Patagonia Ulex regulator front zip full suit, and a 25-liter Black Hole backpack, a new set of fins from Futures, Child plant-based sunnies, and new kicks from Sanook Footwear. Again, enter to win by leaving this podcast a review wherever you listen. You could hit pause and enter right now in less than a minute. Winners will be announced in late July. Now to the show.
My greatest heartbreak for our collective existence as humans at the moment is that you have people who feel so deeply connected to country, who feel so deeply in knowing of the environments that they love, the ocean or of the trees, but they don't feel that they can speak to it from fear of retaliation, that it's not politically correct, from fear that they're not going to say the right thing, from fear that they're going to get it wrong, because they've never been taught how, because it's not part of our culture. There's nothing eloquent that I can say to encourage people to do that. The truth is, what it takes is courage.
Welcome to the Water People podcast, where we talk story with some of the most adept and interesting water people on the planet. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. For us, this is a place to exchange not just ideas and practices, but stories. Experiential knowledge gleaned from the aquatic adventures that shape us. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders past, present, and emerging. Let's raise a glass to something bigger than just great beer. Meet Stone and Wood, a brewery that thinks big and acts small. Today, we're in conversation with surfer, musician, and custodianship educator Nidala Barker. Nidala traces part of her ancestral roots to the Juukan and Jabber Jabber people of the Kimberley in Australia's northwest, where she was initiated in lore and story. Nidala holds a master's degree in sustainability, in addition to degrees in public policy and social justice law. In 2021, she released a carbon-neutral EP named Colors of My People. Nidala currently sits on the board of Green Music Australia and the Returning Indigenous Corporations. Through her music and custodianship workshops, Nidala blends Indigenous wisdom with innovative scientific perspectives to remind us of our belonging to this world. Her work invites us to step bravely into our shared responsibility to protect country. This episode with Nidala was inspired by a weekend put on by Surfers for Climate at a local campground. We gathered with about 100 women for what they called the Water Women Campout, and it was just this beautiful expression of community and having great dialogue and not as much surfing as I would have hoped because there was just so many great talks and workshops. And one of those talks was by Nidala. She helped open up the Friday night. It was a night of connection to country. We had Elder Lois there to welcome us to country. She shared some local story with us and took us through a smoking ceremony. And then Nidala sang some of her beautiful music for us and walked us through some of the ways that she shares with people on how to be a custodian. So I was really excited to get her to our place at this table and to talk through some of what it means to step into custodianship, what it means to acknowledge country and to care for country from her perspective as an Indigenous woman, as an Australian woman, as a scientist, as a musician. And she just had so much richness to share. For me, especially, was this point about the acknowledgement of country. Can you talk about what your experience with that practice has been? Because it's, in my experience, unique to Australia. In modernity.
Yeah, and I guess for me, you saying that has really helped me understand that, this is a practice here in Australia that would be happening all over the world, but, where you grew up in suburban Florida, and then also where I grew up, largely in suburban Gold Coast, Australia, which is mimicked Florida down to the names. We've got a Palm Beach, we've got a Miami. It's pretty classic. But that wasn't part of either of our childhood, that understanding that when people get together, it's really important to tell each other who we are, perhaps where we come from, and where we are. But it seems so simple, but it's something that was just not in either of our foundational experiences growing up. And it's become this thing now that is understood as just sort of right practice, like a right way of being together.
People who aren't familiar with it are often taken aback by the beauty of it. You know, acknowledging country, stating your intentions for being in this particular place at this particular time. At every public event, every single public event in Australia should begin with an acknowledgement of country or a welcome to country by local mob. But I never had really connected to the depth of meaning and purpose behind it. And that's what Nidala really did for me, was help me understand and connect to the why of it. And she breaks it down into basically 3 questions that make up a meaningful acknowledgement of country. The first one is, where am I? Who took care of this country? What do I notice about this place? What do I notice that's beautiful? What do I love about it? 2, where am I from? A place, a particular place. Where did I come from today, maybe? Or where was I born? And what do I love about that place? And then finally, the third question to answer with an acknowledgement of country is, who am I? Who are the ancestors that made my life possible? And what are my intentions for being here today?
So when you hear those 3 guides, how do you respond to that, Lauren? So where are we now and who are you? How do you respond to that? Because, you know, essentially what I feel is happening with this conversation with Nidala is skill sharing. And she is sharing the skill of how to relate to each other and to the space we inhabit properly.
Yeah.
So you know who you are and who you're with before you move forward, hopefully together, instead of guessing, assuming, misinterpreting because you haven't introduced yourselves properly.
Can you walk me through your acknowledgement to country?
Hey, I
feel
just
like I've
asked
talked a
you,
lot.
so you're a shocker
I've
at this.
talked a lot.
Hey, you're a question asker, but you do not answer them willingly. Okay, well, for me, you know, it's always important to me to feel where I am, and I feel so grateful that surfing affords me my position in the world, given that I'm so fizzed up and excited to surf that I always know what the tide is doing right now. And right now, the tide is dropping. And right now, the wind is south. And there are waves of weather coming in on that south wind. Right now, the water is cooling. The gannets are here. The whales are here. The great whites are here. On the land, there are some wattles flowering. And
That's
all
a real
of this,
sign of that's a sign of winter.
Yeah, these are the things that I feel in love with here right now. And I think that is a wonderful way for me to answer that first prompt of where we are. And then essentially the deepening of that is really acknowledging that all of that beauty is there woven in with humans caring and a part of this place as well. So it is entirely appropriate and crucial to acknowledge them. Who have the people been that have looked after this place so well that all those things that I just mentioned can even exist?
And they keep coming back.
Yeah, that is the Bundjalung people of this area. So of course it's appropriate to thank them and acknowledge them, like properly thank them, because I feel all of those wonderful feelings. And it is not solely because of those people, but it is intricately woven in with their story. You know, we are not the dominating hand. We are working with and together with all of those things I just mentioned. So that's how I respond to that one. And then, of course, for me, I just think of my lineage, and I think of that my parents and my parents' parents, like so many of us, endured World War II. My dad's line was uprooted in the Adriatic Sea and taken all the way to the other side of the planet, down to Aotearoa, to New Zealand. And my mum's side, Scottish side, were also moved down to the bottom of the world to New Zealand. And then we skipped over here to Australia. And so I really actually think that that prompt from Nidala about who we are, where we come from, is really equalizing and unifying, because I bet you all of us, when we dig into our grandparents' story, can relate to the uprootedness, the conflict, the global conflict, the struggles that people of those generations universally lived through. And they're all varied, and it's terrible to compare. It's no point doing that, comparing pain. But it's kind of like everyone's timeline has a lot of trauma and suffering in it. So that's where my mind goes with that one. And then in the intentions thing, why are we here? I think that is also an amazing aspect of this, and the genius of it. It's like acknowledging, okay, why are we together here? Why are we gathering in this camp down the road here with all these women to gather together? Why is it just women here? Why are we banding together in this moment of solidarity? Is that because we are a little unsafe feeling when we're out in the daily world among rogue males and a strange toxic masculinity culture? What is it, And I think that's a really genius part of acknowledgement of country as well, is acknowledging the why of why we're all together. And that's different for every gathering, every partnership with someone. If you're just sitting down for a cup of tea, it's kind of like this genius way of just establishing a foundation to then relate to each other and to where we are.
Yeah.
And they're all just, to me, they're just such no-brainers, but it just seems like it was so overlooked by our predominantly European timelines and family lines and cultures. And that's just the most gracious invitation from Nidala to say, hey, this is how our people have done this here. Do you want to give it a try? Give it a try, because it is a little bit sticky and a bit nerve-wracking. If you're a white fella and you're trying to do this, you don't want to be stepping on toes and culturally insensitive, but that is just the most gracious invitation from her to step into this way of interrelating. And what about you now, Lauren?
It is. And one of the reasons that this practice feels as relevant as ever right now is because of the taking of time, the slowing down, and the acknowledging of each other's humanity, the thinking about the belonging togetherness here and now. Like, we live in a culture that's so fast and so rushy. We often think about these acknowledgements of country as tokenistic acknowledgements that happen at the beginning quickly of an event, but they can actually be this moment to drop in and connect and belong together in a moment in time. Nidala speaks to that really beautifully, and I'm just so grateful to take away from this conversation a deeper understanding of why we acknowledge country and how it can create this beautiful moment together. We can carry into a family dinner, a big event, whatever it is. It's really deepened my understanding of the practice in this country and across Indigenous cultures across the world.
Yeah, it'd be great also to hear from people who are listening who come from other lands and other cultures, perhaps of their experience of that, of other ways of doing that, because I feel like it's just something so beneficial and really just so foundational, and it'd be a great conversation to continue.
And also what bubbles up is, like, if we sit down and connect and we make eye contact and I state an intention for where I've come from and who I am and what I want to do here, suddenly I'm human, and it becomes increasingly difficult to treat someone inhumanely, unkindly, or disrespectfully if you have an understanding of that deep humanity.
That's right.
So, Nidala, we always begin in the same place by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. I could prompt you, but I'd prefer just to allow you to bubble up whatever story resonates with that prompt.
When I was 15 years old, I'd really hit the low of my depression, like really quite intensely, had a severe eating disorder, had tried to take my life 3 times. I was living in Paris with my mum in a really small apartment and just feeling so disconnected from everything in the world. It just felt like my existence and the resonance of the world couldn't find a pitch where they could coexist. It was like there was just nowhere that I could connect, nowhere that I could fit in. And it had just really bubbled up to this feeling of exhaustion and of wanting to tap out. And after my 3rd attempt, I decided to go back home to the Kimberley. My mum actually had the idea. And she sent me back home to my dad. And when I got there, my dad got me working on a boat the Willy Pearl Lugger cruise, which was an old sailboat, like an old pearling sailboat that would take people out on the water at sunset. And I started working there, and my job as a deckhand was scrubbing the outside of the boat and pulling up the sails and pulling down the sails and keeping an eye out for the whales. That was really all I did all day, which was perfect for me because I didn't have to speak to anyone. The result of that is that who I was then was somebody who'd say maybe 5 or 6 words in a day. Very inward, would do my job, scrub those barnacles like no one else, but not much else would happen. And one day we were preparing the boat for guests to arrive, and I was on my usual barnacle scrubbing situation on the side of the boat. And suddenly the boat rocked, like more so than it usually would. And we turned around and there was a humpback whale maybe 30 metres from the boat. And a sailboat with a really tall mast already tips quite intensely to the right, to the left. But this whale came right up to the water so close and then was coming even closer, and then it suddenly disappeared. And everybody on the boat started scuttling because they were like, oh no, it's about to breach. It just went up, the tallest breach I've ever seen in my life, and it landed 5 metres from the boat. I almost felt like I could reach my arm out and touch it, and it hit the water so hard that the entire boat tipped halfway into the water. And me on my little bench on the outside of the water of the boat went clean in. I mean, completely in the water. And because of the weight of the whale in the water, I got sucked deep, deep, deep in the water. I was just tumbling, getting suction deep, deep, deep in the water. And I just had this feeling of trust, of, oh, well, if this is how it's meant to go, then it's meant to go. And keeping in mind that I'd already tried to take my own life 3 times, I was like, not a bad way to go, pretty all right. But then the whale looked clean at me. It was like its one eye just saw every inch of my soul. I've never felt so naked and exposed, yet safe in my life. And I was really deep under the water at this point. And then it let out a sonar, like the loudest sound I've ever heard in my life. And it hit my body with so much force that it actually started to tumble my body backwards. So I started to spin in the water. But it was like every time a wave sort of hit me and reverberated through me, it was like doing this echo thing, like. And then I looked up to the surface and I decided to swim up. And as I got to the surface of the water, I burst out laughing. Something I had not done in months. And everyone on the boat was trying to jump in the water and grab me. And I just was completely numb with laughter and joy. It was like every bit of sadness that had kept me so dense and down was gone. It had dissipated. And after that, it's not, as clinical as saying my depression was gone, but I wanted to live. I wanted to exist in this earth. And I'd felt a connection that I'd so deeply yearned to feel. After feeling disconnected and just like this little flying, floating thing through space, I felt a connection. I felt reciprocity. And I thought, oh, that's right. I have a role here. I belong here. I can be in conversation with this world. And that changed my life forever.
Wow. Wow. Reciprocity. That is an exciting and wonderful word with a world attached to it that we could dive into right now. But Lauren, how do you feel when you hear that story?
I feel like I'd like to hear you speak to the word reciprocity a little more, Nidala, if you're willing. How do you make sense of that experience now, being a person as you are who dances between worlds, between cultures as a modern person, but also in your personal lineage, having your mother's influence of academic ways of knowing, your father's influence of old cultural ways of knowing. How do those two streams help you make sense of that experience?
I think for me, it all comes down to the idea of belonging, right? It's like if you think about you're belonging to a family, you're belonging to a group, there's a softness there that tethers you to something wider than you, to something greater than you. And in that belonging, there's an acceptance of responsibility to that group, right? It doesn't just become about you. It becomes about the entire group. So when you're looking at that framework, reciprocity means how do all the things that belong to each other function in a way that gift and respond in ways that allow the greater good of that collective. right? So that might seem very wordy, but in the experience of the whale, what shattered for me in that moment was the idea of loneliness, was the idea that I somehow existed as an individual disconnected from everything. What was clear for me in that moment where I was deep underwater looking into the eye of a whale on really the precipice of life or death on this earth, what was clear to me is that the whale had a role in my life and I had a role in its life, which meant that everything in my life was now tied to this whale and everything in the whale's world was tied to my life. That's reciprocity, in the sense that that whale acknowledged a bond. That whale acted upon that bond. That whale responded. Right? And that's this idea behind responsibility. Responsibility is just an ability to respond. And you have the ability to respond that to which you belong to, right? So that's what I mean by reciprocity, is this idea that it's not so much this, charitable, like, oh, I have so much more I can give. Is this idea of we all coexist in a gigantic dance. How do the movements that I make impact the movements of the other? And how can I bring flow where there's stagnation? Or how can I bring pause where there's chaos? That's reciprocity. It's not so much I do to you, so you do to me. It's how do we act with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Your story makes me think about the strangeness of how we've chosen to construct life in modernity, specifically in cities. You were living in Paris, and isn't it ironic that you can live surrounded by millions and millions of people and feel so alone, so cordoned off, so closed off, because in those spaces we're often disconnected from the living world. And it seems like on the boat you touched that aliveness. That door opened again for you, the reality of interacting with another living being outside of the very human space that you come from, like so many of us live out in our day-to-day lives. How did you move from there?
Well, I think it was funny is that when you were talking, it's like what's really obvious to me is that humans are the toddler of this world, right? If everyone else, everything else, the trees, the whales, the waves in the ocean, the fish, are like our elders, our parents, our aunties and uncles, but we are the toddlers of the world, right? Which means simultaneously we can bring so much shape and so much energy and so much possibility to the world, just like toddlers do in families, right? They create joy, they create laughter, they're just balls of chaotic creation. But without the holding of eldership, without the holding of law, by which I mean LORE, tradition and dance and ceremony, without that, you just end up with a city full of toddlers running around and bumping into each other and not feeling held enough to open to one another. Because when toddlers have a disagreement, they don't have the ways, they don't have the words to contact each other, right? To speak with each other. That's where eldership comes in. That's why, you can, like the other day, I was feeling really frustrated. My partner and I were having this like sticky moment. And we both sort of just turned towards the water and just went, okay. And it was like, that was enough. That was enough, just existing in a framework that grounds you, that guides you, is enough. And I think that's why this idea of modernity is kind of this egoic child, this toddler who's lonely because unguided, right? And that's not the fault of anyone in particular. That's the result of generations of disconnection, of people being so sunken into their guilt and their grief and being so violently aware of what they don't have, of a lack of tradition, of a lack of law, of a lack of being told when you're born, this is who is your ally in the animal world. And this is what you're responsible for. And your job is going to be to care for the underwater ways. And your job is going to be to care for the sky, right? And then be held in ceremony, held in rites of passage of saying, okay, cool, you've learnt your first chapter, on to the next. Here is a new bunch of responsibility. Here's a new bunch of songs, a new bunch of dance. We don't have that in our world. So how else are we supposed to function than to try and find our way as an unguided toddler? I think the age of modernity is really just a whole bunch of people trying to find their way. But there is so much wisdom and so much why and purpose already here, like already available to us. And that's the thing, like maybe it's naive to think so, but I think if we were able to slow down enough just to receive the guidance that's already there. And I don't mean that in like a Northern Rivers woo-woo way. I mean it in a very straightforward, we want stability in our systems. Who is stable in our world? The trees are stable. The rock is stable. How do the old growth rainforests stay together when the paddocks get washed away in the storm? They stay together by grounded roots, by flexibility in their branches, but strength in their trunks. Like everything around us is already telling us how to do things. And I think there was an age where we remembered that. But I mean, the fellow who came up with the planes, with the ideas of a flying plane, looked at a dragonfly, right? It's like everything is there. Yet there's so much distance between the idea of intelligence and the idea of the non-human, right? It's like there's this monopoly of humans are the intelligent ones. It's like if we could just open our understanding and our curiosity. I think it all comes down to curiosity.
Me too.
To what's around us. It's already all there.
I really feel like when you were just explaining trying to find our way, like this is a world full of us trying to find our way, it makes me wonder what you do when you feel lost. So, you're going to go on a road trip in a couple of weeks. And what happens if you and your partner are wanting to go from A to B, but somewhere between A and B, a zag and a zig happen and you're kind of lost? What's your response in those sort of situations, just on a very mundane level? What do you do if you find yourself sort of wayward from where you might be wanting to go or wanting to be? And do you also reflect on that in deeper ways in terms of how you respond to moments of, being lost or off track?
Yeah. I think it all comes down to patience. Like even the idea of being lost. I mean, if you're going from A to B and you have to get to B, you'll get to B. You might pass through a Q and a Y on the way, but you'll get to B. Like you will get there eventually. And I think this is really like the greatest symptom of a disconnected world is rush. Because when you rush, you create stress, you create disconnection, and there's actually just no need for it. And even, like in myself, a feeling I struggle with a lot is overwhelm. And I'm like, oh, but there's this and there's that and there's this and there's that. And it's like, but it will work out. Like there is always a path to be. Like it's inevitable that you get to be.
Yep.
And can you meet that middle ground of discomfort where you're passing through all the other letters with curiosity and patience? Just going, what else lies along the way?
Yeah.
And then adding in a little bit of humility in which you go, I actually have no idea to get to be. I wonder if other people know how to get to be. And that's when conversations come in.
Exactly.
And that's when mentorship comes in. And that's where openness and curiosity comes in. Right? Of going, how did you get to be? Because I'm all the way over here at W, no clue where I went wrong. And then meeting it with play and joy and being like, meh.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing, like patience.
Yeah.
Like all First Nations around the world share this same trait, right? Like we move at the rhythm of the elder, not the rhythm of the toddler. Right? It's like if a group is moving, it doesn't matter if you're the strongest bloke, you're moving with the group. Slow down, walk to the rhythm of the elder, because they probably know where they're going. And you can rush up ahead and you'll take 16 wrong directions and they'll probably still get there before you. So just walk to the rhythm of the elder. And it's okay to run ahead and be excited and try new things. But if you get lost, there's always somebody walking at the rhythm of the elder. And it's just about finding them.
Nidala, what were your foundational experiences with water? And did you have a mentor or an elder or a close person who guided you into being in the water? Or was it a personal discovery for you?
Well, mine, I think, really started with the day of my birth. My mum went in labour at the low tide, like to the minute, and I was born at the very top of the tide.
Where were you? Can you set the scene for us?
So this happens in the Kimberley, in Broome, 12-metre tides every day. Very, very big movement of water. And that's just your standard tide, right? Like 12 metres every day, in and out. And 6 a.m, the sun rises, the tide's at its lowest. My mum went into labour. And slowly this tide comes up and up and up. And my dad calls my grandmother and says, oh, the baby's coming. And she said, no, she'll be here when the tide's here. She was right. I was there when the tide was there. Granted, she also thought I was a boy, but that's less relevant.
Well, you mentioned the great tides of the Kimberley. Can you please tell us the story of Garananja?
Ganananja, yeah. In Broome, where I'm from, the Rubribi is the traditional name. We have what's called the dinosaur footprints. Before it was called the dinosaur footprints, it was Ganananja, the giant emu, the giant celestial emu. In the Kimberley, it's called Ganananja. You could trace the story all the way to the central desert. The Walpurgis people call him Kanananja with a K, but it's the same celestial emu. His stories all up and down, all over. In the 90s, some scientists came to Broome and said, you guys will never believe this. This thing that you call Ganananja is in fact a dinosaur footprint. And it is there because there was a time where the rock was soft and everybody was like, yeah, it's Ganananja. He came and he shaped all the waterways when he came down and all the rock was soft and all the animals were really big. And they were like, no, silly Aboriginal people, don't worry about that. This is a dinosaur footprint. And everyone's like, okay. And they even put a sign. It's a dinosaur footprint. And then someone went in with a Sharpie pen and went, Ganananja, which to this day is amazing. And then 10 years later, they came back. Another whole team of researchers said, you will never guess what. This dinosaur is in fact a giant winged dinosaur. And everyone said, yep, it's Ganananja. We were well aware that it was a winged one. It's a giant emu. And they're like, no, it's not a giant emu. It's a giant winged dinosaur. They put a new sign on. People wrote Ganananja again. And then they came back and they started to do some research in the bottom of the rock pools. Okay, let me set the scene for you. In Broome, it's a territory where the land melts into the sea, right? It's not like here where there's cliffs and then it's the ocean. It's really like the whole of the Kimberley, the entire surface of it just gets gradually lower and lower and lower and just melts truly into the ocean. And sometimes at sunrise and sunset, when the water's really red from the sun and the soil's red, you can't tell where it starts and it stops. It's just sort of melts in. And by the sea, you've got salt water, and then gradually inland, you get fresh water. And this fresh water in a lot of places is really, really dry, but there's these sort of big holes in the granite, these big water holes, really deep fresh water. And the story of Ganananja is that he went in, and when he was walking around, he came down from Bulgarigara, the celestial realm, and he was walking around and making footprints, and he saw the animals that didn't have any water. And he said, well, I have good relationship with the rain. I'll dig some holes and we'll call in the rain and then you'll have something to drink. So he went in and he used his claws to dig up big holes. And then he used his beak and he went in and he scratched up the ground and he created these big pits. That's the story of Ganananja. And he went around and he, all across the Kimberley and all into the central desert, it's the same story. He walked and he just kept making waterways, and he was also real cheeky. So there's a lot of like fun stories along the way. But essentially he had this role making of digging holes. When another group of scientists came in, they decided to look at these strange, very, very strange water structures all around the Kimberley. So they sent big cameras down the bottom. They rose up with the cameras and they went and saw the traditional owners and said, you will never guess what, we have just found giant scratch marks at the bottom. And at this point, people were pretty fed up with it. And they said, yes, it's freaking Ganananja. We've told you so many times. Same fella who did the thing over there, same fella who did that, and same fella who went over there and did that water hole. The part that's amazing is that it took a young Aboriginal researcher, a young woman, to go in and go, wait a minute. Maybe we don't have to spend these millions of dollars continuously sending scientists to try and come up with new answers. And instead, maybe we could talk to the people and ask them, where do Ganananja go to next? And so she did. She went in with a team of 3 people, as opposed to the teams of 15 to 20 people who had been before, on a pea-sized budget, and literally just went and talked to traditional owners, be like, where did Ganananja go next? And she went there, sent the cameras down, sent the equipment down. Almost all of them were accurate, right? What that tells you is all that knowledge is being held, right? And so much of our territory was shaped in reciprocity. So much of our territory was shaped and is held in stories that we know. The reason why reciprocity with territory is essential, reciprocity with country is essential, is that country holds all the stories already on there. And so much of the where do I go next? How do I understand this? So much of science, and I mean, I have a master's degree in sustainability. I am a massive science nerd. But so much of it is trying to scratch that human itch of, I need to understand how it works. But the problem is we rob ourselves of all the richness of why. Okay, cool, it's caused by scratches at the bottom, by probably a giant winged dinosaur. But why did that dinosaur do that? Was it that millennia ago there was already a relationship of reciprocity? There was already the great big strength of one creating environments for the other. Why would he have done that? And why do we remember those stories, right? That to me is incredibly interesting.
At the Water Women Camp Out a couple of weeks ago, Nidala, you gave us the most generous invitation to deconstruct the idea of acknowledging country. And an acknowledgement of country, I'll let you speak to what it means, but it's a new concept for me coming from the States, where I grew up in Florida. The Timucua people were the traditional custodians of that land. They no longer exist. So there's no one to hold the old story there. So coming to Australia and the idea of acknowledging country is so beautiful, potentially, but often it is kind of a stale, tokenistic practice. And you spoke to it so beautifully the other night. I'd love for you to elaborate on what an acknowledgement of country is. But first, can you talk us through what country is? For many of our listeners, when people say country, they think like not city. They don't think of the layers and richness that you mean when you say country.
The term country is not really the right term, but it's all that we have available in English, right? Country signals a more holistic understanding of the environment, in the sense that, yes, it's the physical place. It is. It's the soil under our feet. It's the leaves on the trees. It's the bugs under the earth. Like, yes, it's the physical place. It's also everything that lives on it, by which I mean all its living beings in the plant world and the animal world, and all its stories and all its dances and all its laws. It's Ganananja, and it's the water hole, and it's also the scientists that are coming. The best way to understand country is to think and pull up in yourself a memory that you have, like a strong memory of a place. Maybe it can be having a glass of wine on your mum's couch. It can be a really good wave that you've caught somewhere where it's just that pristine day. It could be somewhere you used to sit in your grandmother's backyard, right? Anywhere that feels bright, like you can see the place in your mind. That memory exists in your mind and it exists in that place, which means that country has millions of layers of memory. Everything that has happened in that place is held in our mind and in that place, because it's not just one. It's not just us. It's us and the place. It's us and the other person. In the same way that after today, we will, all three of us, share the memory of now, so will this place, right? And if it's just you under the tree will remember that in the same way that you do. And so country acknowledges all the lore, L-O-R-E, the cultures, the dance, everything that helps us remember those memories. It acknowledges all the memories, all the practices, every moment that's happened on it, as well as the physical country and everything that happens on it ecologically. So there's a complexity of existence in place. Does that make sense?
It does, and it just makes me think about how quickly miscommunications can happen when I say country and I mean trees, and you say country and you mean this rich plane of existence across time, space, and culture.
Yeah.
Like how difficult to communicate and from such different places. How important to have real, meaningful conversation to get clarity.
And to do things slower, right? To give yourself the time to have the conversation.
Yeah.
I think there's so much conversation around, Indigenous people's relationship to country that falls short. It's like, why are people fighting tooth and nail to protect sacred birthing sites? What does a sacred birthing site mean? That's a very different response to who you ask, because if a sacred birthing site is that depth version of country, then that sacred birthing site also holds every single birth that's happened on it, and every single person that was born there, and every single mother that delivered there. It holds all of their safety, all of their memories, and what happens when that's severed, right? In the same way that there's this pain of, like one of my grandparents had Alzheimer's, and I remember the pain that I had about trying to talk to him and he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember what had happened between us. He couldn't remember who I was. That pain exists on country. It exists when a country is torn down to the point where that country can't even remember who it is. And if it can't remember who it is, it can't remember who its people are. Right? And that's the depth of disconnection that we're facing in this world. Which is why then when we talk about acknowledgements, in today's world you see it, right? Somebody says, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custody, and everybody just glazes over. At best, you glaze over. At worst, you just sit, as I do most of the time, in this like immense discomfort of being like, no, this is feeling like not only a waste of time, but actually disconnecting people. And the reason that is because people are delivering this acknowledgement of country in a way that hasn't actually acknowledged what they're doing, right? An acknowledgement of country isn't just about ticking a political correctness box, right? The reason why there is an acknowledgement of country practice in Australia is not just to tell people this is where you are, which in itself is really important because this is where you are in an understanding of depth country where you've got all those memories, you've got all those things. Understanding where you are is also keeping you safe. So if I'm saying this is where you are in a country that's predominantly men's country, then as a woman you should walk on that with care, right? So it's like, number one, there's a safety component, there's a respect component of this is what has happened on this country. This is where you are, understanding your context. And then this is who I am, presenting yourself to country, right? Presenting your intention. I always in my workshops get people to walk through an acknowledgement exercise and I get them to answer 3 questions. Where am I? Where am I from? And who am I? Where am I sounds like who were the people who took care of this place? Who were the people who know its stories? Because in a 4-minute acknowledgement, I can't tell you the stories, but I can tell you who knows. So these are the people. I acknowledge them because they know the stories of this country. And maybe if you have questions, you can go ask them. And I thank them. Thank you so much for taking care of this country and making it a place that's safe and fertile for me to come and work here and live here and speak here. And what do I notice about this country, right? Who took care of it and what do I notice? Actually paying respect of going, oh yeah, I'm here. I notice that beautiful sunlight on those green leaves over there. Right, to do that, to actually go beyond the human and go out into the world and go, oh yeah, this is something that I've noticed about where I am, placing yourself. And it's funny because this is such a key component in, meditation and bringing presence is literally noticing your environment, which is a tradition that's millennia old of going, okay, cool, I acknowledge the people who took care of here, who are the people who know, and I acknowledge what I see. Right? Then the second part, where am I from? And this is funny because people can answer this however they want. Where I'm from could be, today I've come from Bunjalung country. That could be it. It could be this is where I've been from, this other country, and those are the people who took care of it. That's the other people you could talk to about me because that's where I've come from. And then bringing that link of emotiveness by saying something that you love from where you're from. So for example, today I could say I came from Mullumbimby and I love it over there because it's the land of waterfalls and big trees. And I love the big trees, right? Something that you love about it so that you're calling and acknowledging that bond, your belonging, right? That part's important too. And then the last part is who am I? Who are my ancestors? Who were the people who made me? What lineage am I from? Right? And this can be really touchy for some people who don't feel proud of their ancestry, but whether or not you agree with what your ancestors did is completely irrelevant because it is still their work, it is still their lives that allowed you to exist today. And acknowledging them is respecting that. You don't have to agree with it, but you do owe them respect. Right? And I think that's the part that we get wrong in this individualistic world. I want to be nothing like my parents. It's like they still made you. You might not like them, but you sure as hell should respect them. Right? And I know this ruffles so many people's feathers because they're like, no, but my trauma, blah, blah. You're like, cool. All that remains true. Injustice remains true. But the respect of the work that has allowed you to be here needs to happen. And the reason it needs to happen in the human world is because it also needs to happen in the natural world. Going, I understand that I might not like the mosquito, but the mosquito has a role to play in me being here. And it's like to play that out in our human relationships is really important. So acknowledging your own ancestry. And then the last part is just in who am I? Acknowledging and talking to my intention, right? I'm just saying like, I'm here today to speak with you two and hopefully to inspire some other people to go out and feel more connected, right? a piece about your intention. And that is actually as much for country as it is for the humans listening to you. So it can sound really wordy, but actually in practice, it can sound pretty simple. And granted, it takes more than reading a paragraph. But maybe the lesson here is patience and taking time to do things well.
Yeah, totally. And the wordy thing, to me, that's like the pause enabler too. Like if you have a lot to say, which we should when we have those moments to stop and understand all that has delivered us to this moment and all that is occurring around us, which is so worthy of awe and respect and just loving admiration. They're going to be wordy moments perhaps, or at least full moments to pause in that way on the path and help ourselves and help each other finding our way as we go, whether there's a B at the end in mind or not. But I really love what you're saying, and I feel that there are moments where Lauren and I are involved in like surf gatherings or water people gatherings of sorts. And I always feel that when we get together, there's a real need to acknowledge the moment we're in via our ecological understandings of the moment we're in. So with surfing, for example, you can sit down with each other and say, okay, well, right now it's mid-tide rising. The wind's northwest and light, and it's carrying this cool interior air to the ocean. If we were to walk down the beach right now and dive into the water and go behind the noisy waves, you'd be listening to the song of all the humpback swimming north, going to their nursery grounds. You'd be hearing the high-pitched clicks and whistles of Wajong, the dolphin, doing their thing. You know, you'd be having a moment where we acknowledge all of those sensory and placement aspects that I think we really hope a lot of surfers and water people are aware of at all times. And I think that that's a moment where perhaps we're kind of stumbling in the right way, but it makes me feel that that's my experience ever so subtly of what you're talking about. And I'd love for water people everywhere, we're all water people, but for us to feel valid in those feelings and that sense of belonging just through understanding directionally where we are and in relation to the tidal movements and the nature of the ocean right now, even though they're kind of, resting upon the surfing addiction and the idea of just wanting to get great waves all the time, there's still a wonderfulness to that. There's still an awe and wonder and a loving kind of respect there. And so I just wanted to mention that and see what it was you would feel about that that's happening in a healthy way that we could deepen and expand upon. Because I feel like, surfing is sort of stumbling. Water people, we're stumbling in that area. But I feel like you have so much to share and you have such an eloquent way about you that it would be wonderful to be able to deepen that.
You're really hitting the nail on the head when you're talking about validity, right? Of feeling like you have a right to speak to it. And I think this is where my greatest heartbreak is for our collective existence as humans at the moment, is that you have people who feel so deeply connected to country, who feel so deeply in knowing of the environments that they love, the ocean or of the trees, but they don't feel that they can speak to it from fear of retaliation, that it's not politically correct, from fear that they're not going to say the right thing, from fear that they're going to get it wrong, because they've never been taught how, because it's not part of our culture, right, in the West. The thing is, there's nothing eloquent that I can say to encourage people to do that. The truth is, what it takes is courage. What it takes is bravery to just say, I actually feel so connected to the ocean and I want to speak on behalf of it. Right? That's the true nature of activism, right? Of defending that which we love and we belong to, of going, I go into that water every day. I belong to that water, right? I can speak to that. But it's terrifying because you're like, oh, somebody's going to tell me, who are you to speak to that? Well, I'm going to get it wrong. Then I'm going to say the wrong thing. Doesn't matter. It's your truth and it's your bond. And how do we speak in the human realm to that in the non-human world which we belong to? And that requires courage, and it's terrifying. It is, because you also don't want to dishonor it. Right? It's like, oh, what if I talk about this beautiful thing and I use like bad words and then it's not doing it justice? It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, actually to speak to that bond is all that matters. And it's not about talking over other people. And this is where the line of, like custodianship, traditional custodians comes in, right? Because a lot of my workshops, I call them becoming custodian, right? And I have a big new project coming out, and it's all about that, like encouraging people to step into that space of accepting their belonging, of feeling their belonging to the world, and then accepting their responsibility to protect it, to speak up for it, to be connected to it. Right? If you're a surfer and you don't want to speak to large crowds because you don't like talking to people, draw a picture in the sand for the ocean. Do something for it, right? Like there's something of that in custodianship. Right? It's just being like the one who cares and who protects. And it's like, we belong to this world and all different parts of this world. You don't need to protect the whole planet. Protect that which you belong to. If you like getting out in the waves, that's who you're responsible for. If you like the lakes, that's what you're responsible for. If you like the trees, that's what you're responsible for. No one's asking you to speak for what you don't know. But you are expected to respond to what you have the ability to respond to, which is what you belong to. Right? That part is important. No one is asking for an overtaking in a loud voice of like, oh, I go out in the waves every day, so I'm now tip-top Tom over all the information. There's a big difference between being custodian, speaking to the relationship that you have, and actually having a traditional custodian there who is someone who has had the relationships and stories and who knows that depth of country, knowing that thing of why Ganananja, was remembered by those people. It's like there is a difference there. And no one is asking you to become a traditional custodian, right? It would be deeply culturally inappropriate. But there is something in being a custodian and stepping into that space that for me is really interesting. But it does require courage. It does require boldness. And it requires getting it wrong a lot. And that part's okay too.
Yeah.
That sort of answer to it?
100%. And that humility in that humbleness, like you were saying with the wet season in the north and being put in your place where all creatures are thriving except humans, and that kind of, that sense, that feeling, I think that's something that a lot of water people can relate to, because when you get stuck in a strong current, when you see that incredible whale and the size and power and sound swimming by you, or the shark, or pretty much everything in the ocean that is doing a hell of a lot better than us being in that space, we have that feeling. You get that humbled, wonderful feeling. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm excited about people hearing this and encouraging that coastal custodianship, that ability to care and to nurture that reciprocal relationship that we all have. Thanks for sharing that.
Nidala, I feel like you really play in this beautiful gray space. There's a lot of us who have ancestral histories that we're not proud of, that we don't want to relate to. There's a sense of a new hierarchy where traditional custodians are revered as they should be. And then people who don't have that long time connection, that long charge of lore and story, feel a bit untethered and maybe uncertain about their place in speaking up for things. And you spoke to the courage that it takes to do that. But I'm just feeling that gray space of like, how do we bridge for people like me who don't have old story? How do we step into taking responsibility even if we don't have the momentum of our culture behind us? And I wanted to ask you, you have a master's in sustainability. What does that word mean to you?
The thing with like lineage, just going back a tiny bit on what you said, because I think you put your finger on something really important, right? Like so many people will come up to me after workshops and say, but I don't have a history. I don't have that. You do. You actually do, right? Everybody has a history. Whether or not it's remembered in living memory or not is another question. But I think there's space as well for going out and seeking, right? Like maybe all you know is that you had a grandparent from Ireland, Do you know stories about Ireland? Because if you don't, that's probably a really good place to start, right? Like, there are seeds there, and it is up to you to go and nurture them and grow them. And maybe you won't know your great-grandmother's name, or maybe, you weren't born into a lineage. And I so acknowledge the privilege that I have. Like, I was dreamt into this world by my elders. I was born with a totem. I had my first ceremony when I was 6 weeks old in languages that predate any modern human memory. But there are seeds there. And I think so many people feel disconnected without looking at that, and I think there's a massive opportunity there to remember. And I think that's also how we acknowledge and honour ancestry, because absolutely, a lot of white Australia has a very, very dark history. A lot of people didn't choose to come here. A lot of people did and made a lot of profit from it. But we owe our ancestry respect and remembrance. So maybe you don't remember exactly who it was, but remembering the context where they existed is part of the issue as well, right? And this thing with ancestors is like, no one is asking you to fix what your ancestors did, right? No one is asking you to apologize for them. What's being asked is to show up in the conversation of how we fix this inequity that we're currently faced with. What you're being asked to do is to show up, help, to fix what is broken. It's really fundamentally not about you. It's about going, all our ancestors were in a massive kerfuffle together. Some of them did some really bad stuff. Some of them had really bad stuff happen to them. Odds are all of them had really bad stuff happen to them. Our responsibility is actually showing up and trying to fix and mend some of this broken stuff. And that part doesn't need your guilt. That part doesn't need your shame. That part needs your curiosity and your love and your patience and your creativity and your courage. That's what it needs. And I think if we can just shift that in ourselves, like so many people who have really deep connections with the natural world, who are really well-meaning, just get frozen by this guilt of being like, but my ancestors did this to your ancestors. It's like, I don't want to hold your guilt and your shame on top of everything else I'm already holding. What about instead you join me in what I'm trying to mend? Lend me your ideas. Tell me about the dolphins that you saw. Tell me about the things that you love. Tell me about the lessons you know from the country you're on, because it's different from the lessons that I know. And maybe together, with sharing those stories, we can come up with new ideas. Maybe remembering our old people means that you remember your old people and I remember mine, and then maybe they remember each other. And maybe there's something in a non-linear time where us being friends and talking around a table also heals their relationship, right? That part's interesting.
Please stay tuned while we take a quick break to acknowledge the folks who help make our podcast possible. Let's raise a glass to something bigger than just great beer. Meet Stone & Wood, a brewery that thinks big and acts small, right from the heart of Byron Bay. Stone & Wood isn't just about brewing beer, it's about building a community. Certified B Corp and driven by environmental and social responsibility, they're all about making a positive impact one sip at a time. Their philanthropic arm, the Ingrained Foundation, supports local grassroots organizations, channeling funds and volunteer hours straight into the communities they call home, focusing on environmental and social causes close to the heart. Here's to Stone & Wood for crafting exceptional brews and for making a tangible difference in our Northern Rivers community. Patagonia is in business to save our home planet. Founded by Yvonne Chenard in 1973, Patagonia is a surf and outdoor apparel company based in Ventura, California. As a certified B Corp and a founding member of 1% for the Planet, the company is recognized internationally for its product quality and environmental activism, as well as its contributions of nearly $230 million to environmental organizations. Patagonia's unique ownership structure reflects that Earth is its only shareholder. Profits not reinvested back into the business are paid as dividends to protect the planet. Futures makes the first surf fins from recycled fishing nets. Alpha Net Plus is an innovative collaboration between Futures Fins and Borreo, blending carbon and discarded fishing nets. To date, they've transformed more than 35,000 kilos, that's about 77,000 pounds, of discarded fishing nets into new alpha fins at their headquarters in Huntington Beach, California. Nets that would have otherwise ended up in the ocean. Made for high performance and tested by the best, from our very own Dave Rastovich to friend of the podcast, John Florence, Alpha is available in a wide range of fins for those who want to make a difference with every wave you catch. Learn more at futuresfins.com. The best summer surf seasons go hand in hand with fried eyeballs. Looking perpetually red-eyed might be an indicator of good times, but it also hurts. Good sunnies are non-negotiable, but ours inevitably get jumbled in the beach bag and the lenses get shredded by sand. Child, that's CHILDE, Eco Eyewear reimagines the way we use sunglasses. Instead of tossing out frames because of scratched lenses, the Child for Life program offers free lens replacement up to 12 months from purchase and for a small fee thereafter. Child makes sunnies and prescription glasses from plants, not petrol. It's eyewear that's made to last and able to be repaired for a smaller energy footprint. Let's reimagine the culture of disposability together. Learn more at childeyewear.com. I think I understand that your idea of sustainability has to do with knowing where you are, knowing where you belong, understanding place.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, so much about the realm of sustainability is just flooded with greenwashing. And even, for my first EP, it was a carbon neutral EP. And it's like carbon budgeting and carbon neutrality is murky at best. Right? And it's not about being like, I produced exactly this many amounts of carbon, because that's impossible. I remember recording my first EP and trying to calculate the budget. And I remember distinctly at one point being curled in a fetal position on a rug in tears, holding my guitar lead, going, how do I figure out the carbon emission of this gold tip on my guitar lead? I can't figure this out. And I remember thinking, going down the wrong road there. You are at X. We ain't at B. We're going real far the wrong way. But what it is about is trying to create that relationship of reciprocity of going, I have an imperfect system in front of me that can't understand what I'm trying to do. Over time, we can shift our systems to match our human reality. Sustainability as a whole right now is existing in an unsustainable system. So, of course, all the things that we try to do within it are going to be translated into the lens of that system, which every time we do that, it loses meaning, it loses depth. Is that thing of like being rushed and not being able to have the conversation of that misunderstanding of what does country mean? What's an acknowledgement? And it ends up being like, well, this is what country really means. This is the depth version of it. This is what an acknowledgement really is. And we try to push that up into the system and it becomes this like watered down box ticking nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? It's like inevitably, anytime we try to make it exist in a system that just doesn't have the breadth and the capacity for it, it's going to be watered down. Acknowledging that through and through. I still think there is value in doing that to a sense, mostly as a conversation starter and an acknowledgement that a lot of people aren't in the position of privilege of knowing these things already. Most people are entirely in worlds that haven't even registered any of this, right? So to even have it almost like as a teaser, the trailer of a movie, going, this isn't the whole movie. Right? This is just a little piece of it. But I still want to show you this little piece so that maybe you can come and we can have a conversation and you can see a little bit more of the movie. There's that with the carbon neutrality stuff and all that. There is also a lot of danger with all the greenwashing and the whole thing of sustainability, being like reduce your impact. I just find that so problematic because it's like everything that, like, there's just not an understanding of what the human existence actually is.
It's a denial of our place in relationship to say we have no impact.
And everything in the world requires creation and destruction. Everything that you do will inherently have a positive effect and have a negative effect. Reducing your impact is saying reduce your humanity. Reduce how much you exist, because maybe if you eat nothing and you wear 2 T-shirts your whole life and you don't move and you don't do anything, you don't drive, don't go to work, don't own a phone, don't eat meat, don't eat grains either though. Only eat organic, but you can't have a high-paying job because that's bad too. But also don't be poor because then you're polluting, right? That's all the same thing, right? And you can sugarcoat it in a green layer and be like, oh yes, reduce your impact and buy less. Or you can say reduce your existence. I'm not saying, like, I'm a massive minimalist. I live in a tiny house built out of stuff out of skip bins, right? Like, I'm the picture perfect child for this reduce your impact nonsense. But for me, what's more interesting is, how do you increase your positive impact and decrease your negative impact? Screw reduce your impact, increase your impact, make your voice louder, make your body reach further, grow more food in your garden so you can share more of it. Have bolder conversations, take up more space.
I think this is an especially salient point for women in a culture where we
Massively.
are part of a gender paradigm in the West that teaches women to be small, to reduce the amount of space that you physically take up in the world. And what you're saying is be voluptuous in the space that you take up, extend, expand, connect.
Yeah, 100%. Particularly because, like, there's something about, like, feelings and emotions and the way in which they show up in society, right? Anger takes up so much space in a room. Greed takes up so much space in a room. Ego takes up so much space in a room. What about gentleness? What about soft stories about hermit crabs? Like, if we can increase those stories, then they can take up more room, because, like, the truth is somebody screaming in and coming in their big ego will take up all the room. So it's like, how do we gradually fill it with a completely different frequency, fill it with enough of those gentle, soft, voluptuous and flowy stories and behaviors that when that loud, echoey voice comes in, it doesn't have the room to exist because it's just dissonant. It's like wrong vibe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask then specifics, because I feel like it's been popping up a little bit in the last few sharings, in that, the word sustainability is so vague. And, when we think of doing acknowledgements of country, there's this tragedy of vagueness when it happens the wrong way. So getting specific with what you just said, who can people go to hear those hermit crab stories? Because immediately Robin Wall Kimmerer just popped into my mind, braiding sweetgrass, and that tone, that kind of sharing is something that was deeply impactful for me. And nearly everyone I know who has read that book felt the same. Where can people go? Where do you go to hear those gentle stories? Can you point some of the people or everyone who's listening right now in those directions to some specifics?
The first person you go to is the hermit crab. That's the big thing. Like, I'm a massive fan of Robin Wall Kimmerer. Don't get me wrong. Like, if there was, like, the thing of, like, a dinner party with someone dead or alive, she is always my go-to person. I have sent her 6 emails. I'm
Only
desperate.
6? Are you being honest?
Do you get responses?
I've never got mine. I am so Robin, if you can hear me, please reply to my emails. I know I come on strong, but I really like you.
She'll send you to the hermit crab too, though.
But yeah, I think there's something of, like, yes, there's people who hold a lot of wisdom and who are particularly eloquent and particularly good at what they do. But actually, so much of the research shows the same thing. It's that we learn more from people who we have relationships with. And those are the things that stick with us.
Yeah.
If you want the soft hermit crab stories, go to the hermit crabs and then be that person who tells those stories. You know what I mean?
I do, yes.
I mean, there's amazing people who I find deeply inspiring as well. But I think that part, I almost don't want to give them. We can maybe put it as a little added thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're having trouble listening to the crab, then maybe you can check out this list.
And give it a go. And maybe if you can't hear what the crab's saying, maybe you can tell a story to the crab. And that will feel real clunky for some person. But that's okay too. Just try.
Nidala, can you speak to the purpose and the value of story? We were at this Surfers for Climate Water Women campout together. You came in as this incredible blossoming of story. And then I held a workshop the next day about encouraging people to write their own story in surf culture. We've come from this very white, very masculine, very colonial, modern version of what it means to be a surfer in the world. That's not how surfing always was. And I feel like we're in this turning point where we still have this hangover of this old story, but we don't have a clear story that we're moving toward. And just in general in my life, I guess as I'm coming into middle age, story feels essential to any change. How does it land for you, and what's the value of story in your world?
I mean, story is everything, right? I also run a homeschooling pod, and The kids always ask me, because I tell them a lot of stories, right? And these are kids who are otherwise disengaged in normal schools. And so I tell them a lot of stories because that gets them engaged every single time. That in itself is enough to pull the thread of story, right? To go, why are kids who struggle to focus otherwise so drawn in by story, by narrative? And I tell them a lot of stories, and they always ask me, particularly the old stories, they say, is this story real or not real? And the answer I always give them is, the truth is, with ancient stories, with any stories, we don't know what the world was like then. We don't know what the world was like for those people. What we know is that those stories held enough power and importance to make it through millennia, to still be told today. The part that I find interesting in writing stories and telling stories is how do we weave beauty and enticement around things that need to be told and remembered, right? How do we move away from, lecture-centric expert BS and actually go, this is what is important to me, this is what is important to know, and weave stories around that. Stories that speak to things that can't be spoken on their own, right? That's the power of story, is remembrance, is honoring, is acknowledgement, all those things that we were just talking about, of like going from A to B and all those things, like all that, everything that I've just explained lives in a story, right? It lives in lessons and the beauty of our imagination around it as well. Like they call into creativity. And I think there's a reason why, so much more is remembered through non-written traditions, Like where I'm from, it's 80,000 years of stories of ancestors, of saying that we don't remember who our ancestors are, to me is a symptom of stories not being told. Like I know stories about my great-grandmother. I know many stories about my great-grandmother and her mother, and I don't have photos of them. They didn't have birth certificates. They weren't humans until 1967. But I know their stories, and that part is important. I think to tell stories in ways that are wonderful about the things that we know. That's why this thing of who do we listen to, whose stories do we tell, like that's the important thing. Like we tell the stories of what is ours. That is top-notch revolutionary to me, because it's like that is true resistance. That is moving away from the norm. Like, yes, you can have a keep cup, or you can start weaving stories that your great-grandchildren will know about a world that might not look the same, because maybe some of these species will be gone, or maybe they won't be, but the world that they'll live in is different from ours. So how do we set that up for them? We focus so much on the physical world of going, what can we pass down? How do we build wealth and pass that down to our kids? What stories can you weave for them? How do we remember what made us who we are and pass that on so that the things that helped us through life can help them too?
What comes up for me is the vote that happened in Australia last year, the referendum to enshrine Indigenous consult to the Parliament in Australia. And Australians ultimately voted no. They would not add permanent Indigenous consult. It seemed like such a meager offering, and still it was knocked back. How did that vote land for you and your community?
It was a really, really tricky time. It was very, very tricky, very hard. A lot of infighting and a lot of people disagreeing with each other. Like a lot of people were for it. And Aboriginal people were for it, myself included.
Yeah.
And that was because my ancestors and my elders were for it, and then a lot of people were against it. I think what it really highlighted was, again, this rushed nature of it. There was no time for consultation, there was no time for proper conversation, and there was no time for healing before it. A lot of people said no because it's just such a huge distrust of the government. We're still in a position where we are the most incarcerated people, right? In the NT, we make up 97% of the prisons. We're 3% of the population. That doesn't math correctly. There is just not that many of us left to spare, I guess. And so a lot of people are really on the back foot about it and don't trust government, and it's completely fair enough. How would you place your trust in a government that has repeatedly shown that not only is it incapable, but also unwilling to listen and hear what you have to say? Mm. Because it's who were we to think that even if there was a voice in Parliament, right, that voice would be listened to? Or would it just be misinterpreted? Would the time be taken to hear what we were actually saying? Or would it just be like, oh yeah, you said those words, now we'll take it and make a decision based on that? So I understand why there was a no. The part that really broke my heart about that time was the violence of the infighting. And, you know, like
You mean within your community?
Yeah. I mean, I was quite vocal about it. And I've never, you know, I'm happy for people to disagree with me. It happens all the time. That's cool. But the thing of just nothing, you know, just blatant violence, like all these people unfollowing and all this, like this real secty sort of thing, which I was like, man, this is not how we do things. You know, like we used to come together as people in big cultural camps for weeks on end and dance with each other and sing with each other and celebrate and then make difficult decisions and dance some more and then fight a bit, but then dance some more and tell some more stories. And it's like there was none of that, you know, which for me really signals a really broken fabric of a system. And in itself, you know, like the vote, being a vote for all Australians, I understand had to be that way because for a change in like the referendum, for that scale of change legally requires all Australians to vote on it. And I understand that. But the result of that was inevitably going to be wobbly when 3% of the population are actually Aboriginal. And everybody else is scrambling to try and figure out what Aboriginal people want, or are on the other side saying, I don't give a flying heck what Aboriginal people want. So it was a very tricky time. It was a very, very tricky time. I think for me, what it really highlights is that I'm not sure there is actually space in our current system or government for Aboriginal voice. And I'm just not sure that the depth of existence that is trying to be communicated by Aboriginal people can actually exist in this system. Right? I mean, we talk about it with sustainability, right? It's like bare minimum. Even the word sustainability is like an ability to sustain. Do we really want to be sustained? Or do we want to thrive? Like it's bottom of the barrel. And it's like, I just don't see it ever coexisting. You know, it's so funny because I trained as a primary school teacher and I remember being a teacher's aide in the Kimberley. And yeah, I remember there was a test and I had to test the kids. And so it was about the seasons, right? Summer, spring, winter, autumn, which doesn't happen in the Kimberley. We have 6 seasons and it's either very dry or very wet and it's hot all the time. So winter makes no sense, right? And already I was like, this is going to be a funky test given that most of the kids in the room, English isn't even their first language and they're being standard tested as compared to the same kids living in Balmain, right? I was like, this isn't going to make much sense. And then I had a test and I gave it to one of the kids and it had a autumn leaf on it. And I was like, oh, what's that? And he gave me the word in his language, wasn't for the birds that walk on the mad flaps. And he's like, oh, it's that time of year because those birds are there. And I had to fail him. And it's like a child who has that deep of an understanding of his ecology, of the world that he exists to, that he can literally see a footprint and go, oh, it must be that time of year. Keep in mind, this was year 1, right? A 6-year-old kid who can say, that looks like the footprint that's in the mud flaps, so I reckon it's that time of year because that's when the birds walk on the mud flaps because that's when the little worms are in the mud flaps. Right? And yet he's failed because he couldn't recognise an autumn leaf. That screams pretty loudly to just a dissonance of existence.
Do you see any pockets of hope or forward movement where Indigenous leadership is being respected and is thriving?
Massively. I mean, I'm relentlessly hopeful. But this conversation right here is the hope, right? Everybody who's taking time out of their day to listen, that is the hope, right? I think it's not so much about trying to fit our solutions into the system. It's actually watching this mass exodus of people who sure still work in a system and exist within it, but actually are taking time to listen. I mean, I have hundreds of these conversations. I run workshops all over the country where people take time to come and listen and learn and deeply engage with themselves and deeply engage with their country. I mean, I receive all the time letters and songs and dances and photos of people going out and engaging with their environment and connecting with it. Right? That is the change, and it's not going to be loud because it doesn't need to be the big egoic voice in the room. It doesn't need to be loud. The change is happening and it's going to be in the image of nature. Right? A tree falling's real loud. Something growing isn't. But it's like, you know, when you plant something in your garden, you're like, don't know if that's going to take it. Then you come back a week later and you're like, wow, you are very large and flowering. But that's what it is. You know, it's quiet and it's subtle and it's piece by piece. But it's happening everywhere. I really do believe that.
I love what you just said about the falling tree being loud and the sprout is quiet. And I feel like that opportunity to actually be together is really worth pursuing right now? And is that something you've felt, considering you're putting workshops together and you're putting people together, physically together in a space? And when we see just the nature of the last few years and the excessive compartmentalization of everyone, through COVID and everything after that, is it like more important than ever for us to get together right now? Should we just be coming up with any excuse to physically be together? Because I feel that, like in this area, when COVID happened and everyone was doing the sect thing that you're talking about, basically getting into a corner and just defending from that corner and dividing, and then the floods came, and all of a sudden we're all in the hills together, cooking up, cleaning up, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, not face to face through a screen, flaring up. But we're all together, and there was a wonderful nature to that time where a lot of those worldviews and mental constructs that seemed so real and so defendable just dissolved, and people were just helping each other out and actually having a really freaking good time together. And it was beautiful and amazing and so needed at that time, it felt like. And that just feels like since then, any opportunity to be together is a great thing. Has it been a similar experience for you?
I mean, it's even reflected in the system. Like, do you know what the most valuable thing is in the online industry? Like,
you're looking at the wrong person.
The most valuable thing. Attention. It's literally people's attention. It is screen time. They will pay advertising companies in units of attention.
Wow.
That says something, right? When even the economy clocks onto it, the digital economy clocks onto it, that our attention is our most precious gift, and we are currently giving it away for free to the wrong people, right? Yeah. There's this beautiful train of thinking that's like, if you're not paying for something, you are the product, right? In an economic sense. Like, you are the product. You are on social media, you are the product, right? This idea that, our optimal focus time is between 30 and 90 seconds. It takes a lot longer to tell a story than 30 and 90 seconds. To come together in a physical way means that you're not going to go for a cup of coffee with someone and be like, 90 seconds, see you later. You know what I mean? It's like, because actually our bodies slow us down, and that's exactly what we need. We need our physical form to slow us down. Right? Do you know that sitting in a room with someone for 2 minutes and means breathing in the same room for 2 minutes? And in 2 minutes, your breathing and my breathing synced. 2 minutes is what it took for our nervous systems to sink into each other. 2 minutes, like, that is so fast, right? And then once we're synced into each other, then we can do things together. And I think getting together is really important. Doing things together is even more important, right? Because you can get together and be like, I don't know what to do, let me just pull my phone out, or, getting together with family and then you're arguing within the first 2 minutes. Yeah. But you can get together and play.
Yeah.
Even if it's like, just pulling out a board game. That's all you need. And there's like quite a lot of research that's been done that, I think this is the nerd in me coming out now, that
let her out.
8 minutes of connection is what you need to re-regulate yourself. So people who are particularly this research was done on people with depression, that 8 minutes is what you need of connecting with someone for your stores to be rebuilt. 8 minutes.
Wow.
So think about how much you can impact somebody else's life by literally just having a conversation with them for 8 minutes.
Oh,
and you've literally just regulated the other person. Like, somebody can be in the deepest depth of their depressive hole and you just exist with them for 8 minutes, and their nervous system, all their brain chemistry's changed in 8 minutes. Like, you steep a cup of tea and you drink it.
Yeah. That's just it really illustrates the point of why people feel so depleted and void-like when just flicking at things on their phone.
Yeah.
And if you're flicking at things for that 30 to 90 seconds repeatedly and thinking, that's my moment to connect with the world and see what's going on in the world, and yet there's this chasm inside from doing that day after day, or every morning when you wake up to see what state is the world in, makes perfect sense that that's how you'd feel at the end of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, there's really a thing of like, of not being like, oh, phones are the problem and social media is the problem. I don't think that's the problem. I think the way that we're using it and that we behave with it is the problem.
Certainly,
I think
yeah.
it's really essential and important to be able to communicate with each other. And there is so much possibility. The thing is, how do we communicate with each other? Are we just clicking a video, watching the first 10 seconds, being like, yep, that's good, share it on my social media, without actually engaging with the content? Or are we actually using that as a platform to seed interest, to do more research, to connect with that person?
Yeah, stepping off point, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. But it's funny because I think it was actually Michelle Obama talked about social media in the same way that she talked about cars. She said when we first started with cars, there was no seatbelts in it. The windscreens were pure glass. So many people died. Like, so many people died because there was just no safety measures around it. There was no airbags, no seatbelts. Babies were just like in a basket in the back, and it was chaos. That's the stage that we're at with social media. There is no safety mechanisms around it. And it is actually the responsibility of the people creating that to set in those boundaries. And it's not like this thing of like, no, but you know, it's the economy and people are allowed to do what that. No, you've invented a technology that is highly dangerous. It is also amazing in the same way that a car is amazing because it got me here today. But it requires safety features. We had to put laws around it and have speed signs on the road and have people monitor it. We are talking about the same level of threat when it comes to social media. The issue is not with the tech. The issue is with the gung-ho cowboy mentality around it about it's just on a phone, so it's fine. It's not. It requires the elders to come in and actually say something. Do you know what I mean? Like, that part is really important.
Yeah. Which is a tricky space because when you look at it, who has lived with this before? None of us. Yeah. It's all so new. You know, like it's just it's a very new experience.
And it's highly addictive, right? Like, it's made that way.
Yeah.
Speaking of new, you recently turned water on in your home that you built. Can you talk us through building the home and what it has felt like to live without running water and what it feels like to now have water in it?
This is such perfect timing because I spent so long journaling about this yesterday, about what have I learned living without running water for 2 years, well, over 2 years. And the biggest thing that kept coming up for me is that convenience robs abundance. When things are convenient, you lose the feeling of abundance. In the last 2 years, my dishes have never built up like that before. You know, like if it was a sunny week, there was piles of dishes and I would be dirty for like days on end because there was no water. But the result of that is when it rained and I would just run outside butt naked to put all my dishes out and all these pots to try and catch this literal pure water falling from the sky. I just remember looking up and being like, oh my God, like this falls from up there, already filtered, ready to go, is just coming down all around us. And that feeling of abundance, I've never felt that before. Of going, whoa, like this is extraordinary. And I remember drinking out of a pan that I just put out and drinking out of it and just tasting every bit of water touch my mouth and go like, whoa, this just fell from the sky for me. And then I went into the house and I turned on the tap, necked a couple glasses of water, walked away without even thinking about it. I was like, there's something about convenience that just creates that disconnect, right? Like a lot of us who live on rainwater, we forget that what we're drinking and what we're washing with was gifted to us by the sky and its clouds. Some of us even might have bore water, and it's like we're drinking water that's been held under the earth, filtered by biome that's millennia old and kept safe there for us, and we just drunk it. But there's something about that convenience is disconnection in a way. That being said, it's not easy living without water. The two of you would know that. Sometimes it's hard.
Yeah.
But
it makes you appreciate a hot shower forever and ever.
It really does. That was my last reflection. I was like, a hot water shower is borderline divine.
Yes.
As close to divinity as I can get in this world is a hot shower.
Agreed.
Yeah, and there's like a real thing of that. And then the other big thought that I had, and this isn't like even a reflection on waste, this is just a massive reflection that I had around how much water we go through, like how quickly it goes.
Yeah.
Like I was researching it yesterday. The average Australian goes through 274 litres per day. Per day, 274 litres. For the last 2 years, I've lived on more or less 15 litres a week. And also acknowledging that most of the time I just like go in the water. I'm never like out in the surf or like swimming in the river and all that. So
Yeah.
it doesn't count for showers, but I'm aware 15
Wow.
litres is not a lot enough. But there surely is a middle ground between like 15 litres and 274 litres a day. Like that's just wacky to me.
What's the distribution? Is most of that going down the toilet?
Heaps of it would go to a toilet flush is 7 to 9 litres per flush.
Wow. Yeah, that really speaks to the wastefulness of convenience. It's so interesting, convenience, because the intention of so many of the inventions that bring, quote, convenience to our lives, they're meant to create abundance of time. And we see it with technology. Technology is meant to free us up to do other things, but actually it's just become this black hole of disconnection. I really see your math there.
And
It's making sense.
It's like the problem isn't the tool. The problem is what we're doing with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, convenience is amazing, but what are we doing with our spare time? Like, it would be insane to go and see some of like our really old ancestors and be like, guess what? We got cars that drive super fast. We have power tools, so you don't have to like use sharp rocks. We have all this stuff, and they're like, cool, you must spend so much time doing things you love. And we're like, no. We just work heaps more and we just keep doing that.
Yeah. I think about washing clothes all the time, how much work to manually, like if you were really going to wash all of your clothes by hand, what that would require, how much time, actually probably how much connected time, because you'd be sitting talking with someone else, telling story
doing something
during
together.
that time, connecting. Like, I don't really want to sit down and do that with my time, but I do want the story time.
Yeah.
And that doesn't happen as naturally as it should.
And I think that's the thing, right? Like, what we're saying here isn't like stop washing your clothes by hand. It's saying like, if we do have all this convenience, then we have so much more time for connection, and why rob ourselves of that? Yeah. You know, the part that keeps rolling around in my head isn't, you know, like, oh my gosh, we waste so much, rah, 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 because that's just breeding ground for eco-anxiety. My thought is, what happens when we don't have the water to flow through our systems anymore? What's on the other side of that? Is it just struggle, or is it more connection? Do we go back? And I'm really interested to see it in myself. Like, will having running water mean that I'm now a lot more wasteful with it, or just that I use more of it? I don't know.
Well, hats off to you for just doing that living experiment.
You guys did it too.
Yeah, and I feel that, and it's just, I love getting to sit with someone like yourself and hear that you are pursuing ideas and actualizing them and experimenting and circling back to where we started all of this, and curiosity, that was a key word when we started this conversation.
100%. And that's what ignited this whole tiny house project, was just driving past work sites and seeing all this stuff wasted. And I was like, I reckon you could make a house out of that. And then I thought, I wonder if I could make one out of that. I had built IKEA furniture beforehand. Like, I was not a builder at all. Yet 2 years later, I've built a house.
Yeah, I feel like that curiosity is just such fertile ground for story time too. Like, you have something to say, you have a story to share through that pursuing of curiosity. Like, I tried this thing.
Yeah.
This is what happened at the end of it.
Yeah.
And these are the people I asked for help. And then I got to know Bob, who did the plumbing. He's a really interesting guy.
Yeah.
And whatever, you know, it just,
Yeah.
I love that too. I see that in Lauren a lot because of her academic history and pursuing ideas and how to learn. And that learning how to learn is a great thing. And, you know, that wasn't part of my story growing up, pursuing intellectual avenues. But I just really, I love being around that quality in people. And I can definitely feel and see that in the two of you. It's just great to be around.
And I think curiosity means like being comfortable with making mistakes. And I think that's a big symptom. Like, a lot of people are just afraid of making mistakes. You know? Give it a go. See what happens. You know?
What are you dreaming up now, Nidala?
It's very large and ambitious, very on brand for me. I am currently working on a new musical project, which is going to be called Becoming Custodian. And it's going to be 5 of my songs that tell the story of my journey to custodianship. So 5 key moments in my life that have made me a custodian. And between each of those is going to be a wisdom keeper interview, which is like a 3-minute halfway between a guided meditation and a TED talk from an elder that I respect. on the theme of the song I've just sung. And there's going to be like cultural songs, and there's going to be a mini documentary and a giant tour. So yes, ambitious. But I'm leaving in like 2 weeks to start it. So I'm really excited.
So this is part of your road trip,
Yeah.
is creating.
Yeah.
Oh, so when you go on the road trip, that's the creation, or is that the sharing?
Part of it. So essentially on the road trip is also going to be seeding inspiration and all of that, but also connecting with key elders along the way and starting up conversations. And at the moment I have 5 wisdom keepers. It might expand to be more, recording just stories, people's stories, and putting it together. I have no idea what it's going to look like. As with every one of my projects, I'm deeply under-equipped for it at the moment. But we'll see how it lands, and I'm sure it'll work out.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Well, really look forward to and listen forward to listening to that. We did a similar thing years ago in the hall down the road here with an elder in surfing, John Peck, who's just an amazing water person. And I knew he had just so many stories to share. I'd heard a lot of them over the years. And so we got him and some friends together in the hall down the road here and packed it one night. And I'd basically just give him a tiny prompt for one of these stories, and then he'd go off and tell this story, and then he would stop and we'd play music for just a couple of minutes and kind of let the story simmer and settle into people. And then the music didn't have lyrics or anything, it was just instrumental. And then I'd prompt him with another one, and we were anticipating that it would go for like 40 minutes to an hour. And so that's the 30-second to 90-second modern brain kicking in there. But what happened was 3 hours later, not one person had stood up to use the bathroom or even really moved. Everyone was glued to that spot and to those words. And then the music and that really beautiful balance of the two, that it wasn't just constant verbiage, it wasn't just words, and it wasn't just music. It was just this dance between the two that for some reason we stumbled into that form for him and for that space and those people in the hall. And it's still something that people come to us now and say, when are you going to do another one of those? That was unbelievable. So I really look forward to hearing what you're going to do with that, because I do feel like that's a form that's so wonderful to play with. Is that something you've experienced before in that
that's how
nature?
ceremonies held.
Yeah.
And has been all over the world for millennia. You know, story, important conversations interwoven with song and dance and remembering. And adding on to that, like, how amazing would it be if the important decisions of this area were done in that space? Of elders telling their stories, of music being played so that things can land. And then we talk about the things that matter. Then we make the decisions together. And then we hear from another elder. And then we talk about it some more. That is how things are supposed to be done.
Thanks for listening with us today. If you like what you heard, please consider sharing an episode with a friend. Our editor this season is the multi-talented, absolute legend, Ben Jake Alexander. The soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes by Ben. We have a few new Water People experiments this season. You can find every episode of the podcast on our Water People YouTube page, or subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, and behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast and more via our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast.